You are very welcome to another episode of the Scaling Your Business podcast. For this episode, we are joined by Roy Lalor, the Managing Director of School is Easy Ireland, and also the Director of Pitman Training in Swords. Roy, you're very welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Rian, and thanks so much for having me on.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Roy, typical fashion of the shows, we spend the first couple of minutes getting to know the guest, and then we jump into the specific topic we're focused on. So with you, the information I know that you went to university in Galway back in the day, but I'm going to take a guess that you grew up in Dublin. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but what was life like growing up back in the day? Any favorite standout memories, hobbies that you had interest in?
I grew up in Greystones. My parents lived in Monkstown first, and then we moved to Greystones when I was about 10, so I hadn't much choice in it. But Greystones was a nice place to grow up, and swimming, sailing, rugby, all the various sports that you play in a seaside town. A bit like where I live now, which is scary. They're two quite similar towns. But yeah, my childhood was pretty good. My parents had a nice house. They were what you might say, asset rich but cash poor. So things were tight enough sometimes. And I started work when I was about 12 because my father actually lost his job in 1970. So I was drafted in. When he got a new one, I was drafted in to work, and I worked in a plastics factory in Wicklow packing. So I was there from 8 in the morning till 5 in the evening. So that gave me a good idea of discipline and work, and also the things that I probably didn't feel like doing. So that was part of it. I went to school in Presbray. Now, Presbray at the time when I went there, they were building a swimming pool, and it was supposed to be open in September, I think in September 1971 when I joined the school. But the pool didn't open on schedule, building problems. And I was pestering the builders every day until December when they finally opened it. And it was a great thing to have when I was a student. So I had done a lot of swimming when I lived in Monkstown, but when I was able to swim in this pool as well and train, and I was swimming competitively, and I was also doing life saving. And then as a result, at 18, the brothers rented the pool to me, and I was teaching swimming classes in it. Now, yeah, so from an early age, I had kind of entrepreneurial propensities, maybe, in a small way. Now, in a small way, and I was just a student, and I had a good partner. So that's kind of where things started with the entrepreneurial thing. That I was always kind of thinking of things. Now, again, fast forward to when I was 21, same partner that I had the swimming classes with, and we rented a school for the summer, but lost our first shirts, because the thing, we were going to run a summer school and it didn't take at the time, and we did a fair bit of marketing. But again, you learn from your mistakes and you regroup. And it was a difficult time at that age to be, in financial difficulty.
What do you think it was? What do you think it was that led to that not being the success that you had hoped it would be?
That's an interesting one. Probably we did a lot of leaflet drops to schools. We did a lot of marketing, but we were probably underfunded in the marketing. And I think it's a thing that I learned, that if you are going to run a business, for instance, even a franchise, it's not enough to have the money to buy the franchise or start the business. You have to allow for a good bit of money for sales and marketing. Problem is, when things go wrong, people start to shut or cut the sales and marketing budget, or the bean counters cut the sales and marketing.
Exactly.
But really, it's sales and marketing. No sales and marketing. It doesn't matter how good the product or service is. So I did learn that lesson early on. But it was an expensive lesson. I could have done without it. But so we kind of moved on. I was always doing something to do with the water, canoeing lessons, and the swimming lessons. But and then we were doing windsurfing, canoeing, and sailing contracts with local language schools during the summer. Again, this is when I was a student and just embarking on my professional career, because nobody went into a job then with a definite idea. Like, it could take you a couple of years to get sorted. You might be doing part-time work, whatever, and you were just trying to get yourself organized. And I had this liking for business all the time. But then, obviously, in those days, your parents thought you should get the job you were trained for. So as it happened, although I studied law, I went into teaching. So I was teaching for a long while. So I've been in education and training really for probably for most of my life anyway.
What is it that you like about teaching that's kept you in it? Because you, as a young kid, you enter the education system. And for me, that ended at 22, 23 when I got my degree. But for you, and like my girlfriend, she's a teacher, she's stayed in it, but you a lot longer than her at the moment. What was it, or what is it that attracts you to teaching?
I like the idea of seeing improvement. So whatever I teach, if I teach someone canoeing or I teach somebody swimming, I like the idea of seeing improvement. And it's the same when you take on a class for the first time, whatever that class might be. Now, I worked in further education for most of my career, but when you take on a class for the first time and you're trying to get them through those stages of norming, forming, conforming, whatever we say in leadership theory, but eventually when they settle in, you're seeing the progression, you're seeing them improve, not just the metrics that we use, the FETAC or whatever the particular flavor of the month is in certifying, but it's seeing them develop as people really is probably has been an interesting thing. And also keep in touch. I have, like I mentioned, Killian Fitzgerald, who is a friend of mine for a long time. He was a student of mine, and then we were involved in sailing as well. And he was an instructor when we were teaching sailing to the language schools. But keeping in touch with people that I knew, it's an interesting thing to see people as they get older, then how they've developed, how they do develop, and how successful some of them become as well. Some of my friends have, say, who I might know from education, have far surpassed me. And from a teacher's point of view, that's a good thing. It's nice to see people becoming more successful than you. I think that's a thing about teaching that otherwise you couldn't really be in it. You'd find yourself dissatisfied if you. But I've been very happy about that. So I like that part of it. I like the fact I spent most of my teaching career in Finglas, so I hoped I was doing some good then. And when I retired or when I stopped teaching, I felt, well, I hadn't had to tell many lies, and I'm pretty proud really of what I did. Now, I could have done more, and everyone feels when they look back they could have done more. But overall, over my career, I probably tried to stay in the top third of teachers in my college, and I hope I did. I tried to get on with students. I tried my best, I think. So that's.
What's interesting to me, Roy, is when I ask people questions around impact and influence, and I'm going to pose this question to you in a moment, and it goes something like, people can usually point to a small group of people that had a massive impact on their early years that's helped them become the person they are today. People like close friends, parents, teachers. When I pose that question to people, almost everyone will think of a teacher that had a positive impact on them. I've taken clips of people naming the teacher and the university or the secondary school, found that teacher wherever he or she is and sent it to them, and it made their entire week. And but they never knew the impact they had on that person until they came on that podcast, and it was very random. They ended up on my podcast and they said it. So there's probably tons of people out there that you've influenced in a positive way that helped them become the person they are today that you've never even heard of, because of the 20 times I've done it on my podcast, that teacher or lecturer never knew the impact they had on that student. In fact, one student credits his entire success of his business to this specific teacher. So my question to you is, same question. Is there any 1, 2, or 3, or 4, or 5 people that you can pinpoint in your early life that massively influenced, that helped you become the person you are today?
I think that's a very hard one to answer, because I think when you're very young, certainly when I was very young, life was slightly more chaotic than it is now, let's say, so there was socializing to be done. And I don't think that young people then were as focused as young people are now, or as capable. Now, I have 2 sons who are very capable and were certainly very focused from an early stage. I hope I've been a good influence on them. But in terms of myself, I think I was living fairly just getting on with life, but perhaps not as career focused as I could have been when I was young. So things, I suppose, I probably would have liked studying law, but in those days it was very hard to get an apprenticeship unless your father was well connected. So that wasn't really on the cards at the time. And so although I studied law and was interested in it, that didn't come around. So I can't say there's anyone in law that has particularly influenced me, you know. Although, as it happens, my younger son is doing law now and will qualify as a barrister next year.
Congrats.
You know, that's life. In terms of people I know, I I suppose there was a chemistry teacher in Presbury called Tom O'Connor, and he was a very good guy and certainly very kind to all of us when we were teaching. And then there's another guy, a maths teacher I remember, called Mick Mackey, whose son I met years later, who was actually selling computer services to our other business. And I remember remarking on it to him that his father was a very humane man. And I could see he was quite moved by the idea that his father was one of the nicest people we had. So I suppose there's a couple of people like that. But in the sense of influences, I think in a funny way, I probably am my own man. And I'm actually, although I seem quite mild, I'm terribly stubborn. I think it's a trait in our family. So I think when I was younger, I mean, I was married at 28, and I wouldn't have taken advice from anyone on how I should deal with that. But I remember recently giving my son some advice. He's 29, and he's a medic. And I look up at him because he's 6'4", and I was giving him some fatherly advice, which I'd say he wasn't terribly keen to take, but he took it. He didn't give up. And then I realized, you know, I'm talking to a professional guy of 29, far smarter than me. And I got married at 28, and I'm giving him a lecture about how he should live his life. I thought, stop there, you know, that's pointless. So I think, you know, things like that come up or hit you occasionally as well, and you think, you know, maybe you just be careful with the advice, or don't offer it unless it's really wanted, you know.
Yeah, interesting. We got you on the show to talk about all things franchising. You are the master franchisor. On your LinkedIn, the title is MD of School is Easy Ireland. So I could take an attempt at telling the listeners what it is, but you'll do a much better job. So the mic is yours, right?
Okay, well, School is Easy I have the master franchise for Ireland, and I'm also involved in I've had a franchise for Pippin Training Swords for the last 15 years. Now, both of those brands are owned by Launch Life International. It's a Canadian-based company that started, I think, in 2003. And Launch Life means to launch your life. So they are an educational multinational, and they want to be the #1 brand in the world. So they have 5 brands. They have Pippin Training, they have School is Easy, they have Engineering for Kids, they have the Academy of Learning. So they have, these are their brands, and they're established around the world. We were at a quarterly meeting for Pippin there about 2 years ago, and they mentioned at the meeting that they had this interesting opportunity in a master franchise. Now, to go back a bit there, I had looked at master franchising in 2006. I'd been in touch with the Irish Franchise Association. Michael Bradley was the chairman then, the late Michael Bradley, only died recently. And I was talking to them, John Green as well, who runs ChemDry. And these two guys are very keen on franchising, but very ethical franchisers. And they said to me, I had a safety training business and almost nationwide, and I wanted to try franchising it. And they said, well, you'd have to have a pilot for 3 years, and you can't franchise it unless your pilot is up and running and totally successful. And then we've got to come in and kick it around the place and, you know, get under the bonnet, literally. And I said, well, maybe it isn't possible to do this just yet. I had thought it would be a good way to expand quickly. But so I paused that. We kept the safety training business going in the model we were using, which was contract workers. But we looked instead at a Pittman training center. So we liked Pittman. Education and training, again, pops up in our CVs all the time. And so we took on this brand, Pittman Training Swords, which we've run for the 15 years. So it was a natural thing. I trusted the people who were running Launch Life, because when they took over Pittman Training, they solved quite a big technical problem that we'd had for about 1.5 years under the previous owners. So I had confidence in their technical abilities. And I took on this School is Easy, and it's based on territories. I have the territory of Ireland, the 32 counties, and we sold 4 territories in Dublin already.
Wow.
It's a territory on the go in Cork as well. And we're looking basically for people in other areas around the country, like Cork and North Cork and Kerry and Kildare and Meath, some of those larger counties that would be perfect for home tutoring, which is what we do. So what our model is, we send a tutor into the home to deal with an individual student. It's not 100 kids in a room doing classes. It's one-to-one tuition with a tutor who is selected to suit the child in consultation with the parents. And if the tutor doesn't work out, we can actually change the tutor. So that's our business model. And so what I'm looking for is, if you like, an area manager for Cork or Kerry or Kildare or Meath. And that person mightn't necessarily have been in education. They could be a team leader. They could be somebody who has managed or supervised, but they would be responsible for recruiting and managing their own team of tutors, 20 to 25, 30 tutors if they get very successful. And then those tutors give the tutoring in the particular subjects that are in demand. So it's, for instance, maths might be the number one, because a lot of people have a block with maths. If you're a youngster going into school, in first year of school, and you don't get maths at the start, you're scuppered for the next 6 years, and you'll be doing a very weak leaving cert in maths. And maths is quite important. There's a lot of areas where numeracy is needed, to get into accounting or engineering or any of those sort of technical things. They all need a good grounding in maths. So if you have a problem and you can solve that problem in first year, instead of waiting to sixth year when you have a kind of a block about it at that stage. So that's maths. Now, there might be a demand for maths, I don't know, in Kerry, but there might be no demand for Irish, because everybody in Kerry probably is pretty good at Irish. But in Dublin, there'll be quite a demand for Irish, because in Dublin we have Gaeilge Baile Clia, we're not traditionally that good, although some people have gone to Irish schools, and that can be different. But so different subjects might be stronger in different areas. But that's the model anyway. The master franchisor gives the franchise to a person that they deem is suitable. Now, I'd want somebody who's energetic, who's committed to. Yes, you're working from home. Yes, you're working from your kitchen table maybe, but you still have to put the hours in. You still have to answer the phone in a timely manner if somebody rings up looking for a grind, and you still have to make sure your tutors are turning up to do the tutoring at the time, because that's what it's all about. It's you can't be late for a class or for a meeting the student. That doesn't work. You have to be able to deliver everything in a timely manner. You need to be able to look after marketing as well. You'll be doing marketing in your own area. You'll have your own website, so it could be schooliseasy.com/Ireland, or it could be schooliseasy/Kerry, say, if that was your thing, and you put your Google AdWords onto that, and that's how one of the ways you attract your clients, if you like, in your county area.
Do you know what's interesting? I chatted to a woman from the UK called Kim Antonio. I can't remember the name of her business. She's on the podcast maybe 50 episodes ago, and she spoke, her whole thing is around helping students at the younger age, where if they fall behind in a particular subject at 10 years old, then trying to catch up at 11 or 12 is just so difficult. So it's making sure that those students don't fall behind and putting things into place so that they can help those students overcome the hurdles and some of the difficulties of some subjects. But the question here is, I'm very familiar with the franchise model. Sandler Training, the business that I'm involved in, is a franchise model. And I was chatting to the UK master franchise recently. They've got conferences every 3 or 4 months, to kind of internal conferences for their franchise owners to learn from one another, and they're bringing guest speakers. And one of the things they were saying was around the topic of growing more franchises across the UK, and in their package, what are some of the things they showcase to show off the attractiveness of the franchise. And some of the things are like, the average franchise in the UK earns £235,000 a year. It's a business with no ceiling on it in terms of revenue potential. They provide the stats on what kind of businesses are in the specific market in the region they're buying into, and so on, so on, so on. The question I have for you, the reason I mentioned that was just to give people an idea, was if someone is looking to become an area manager, like you've just mentioned that you're looking for, what are some of the possibilities and attractive things that might bring them into it it to become an area manager? Because you did say that they don't necessarily need to be involved in education, and it's more of a role to come in and grow a region. So what are some of the things that they can expect to see if they work their ass off?
Okay, well, firstly, if it's a normal startup, if you start up a business, the chances of your business being there, the new business being there in 5 years' time is probably, well, it's not very high. But if you start a franchise, 90% of franchises are still there after 5 years. So I would say, first of all, that a franchise is a very good model. Now, you may not be able to conquer the world. You might only be able to conquer the kingdom if you have Kerry as your district, you know.
I like what you did.
But I think that a lot of people might find that satisfying if they were thinking of moving from the corporate world, say from the 9 in the morning till 9 at night type of thing, always on sort of life. They might feel that, and everybody's more conscious of working from home now and of lifestyle since the pandemic hit. So I think that it could be very attractive for somebody who has been very effective in a career, but maybe not burnt out, but is feeling after 20 years, maybe I should do something else. So that's one person that might try to do it. As I say, an interest in education would be a great help. And a number of the people who've contacted me, although they may not be in education, but you can see that they've been on a board of their school, or they've been certainly interested in education, or somebody maybe is doing one of the other franchises, but maybe thinks that this might give them more flexibility or more freedom to make a better living. So you can make a good living. You won't get rich. If you want to be a multimillionaire, you probably better start building your spacecraft and, you know, head for the stars like the Amazon owner, Jeff Bezos, and somebody.
Yeah.
Like, we're not going to be doing that. But if you want to take a risk, but not be on your own, if you want to have good support from a head office where you'll get marketing support, advice, HR advice, advertising, PR, all of the things that you get from, say, attending meetings with your peers in a franchise group, I think that's very useful. I look back at my own experiences in Pitman, and it's not all rosy in the garden, and there's sometimes ferocious rows. You go to a quarterly meeting with the Pitman owners, and they're a very feisty bunch. They all have other businesses. They're very engaged in what they're doing. Their focus is on making a decent living and and they run their centers very well, but they're businesses. They're all business owners, and we've had a few humdingers, you know, where people have very differing views on how something might be done. But that's part of a group dynamic, and that happens in all successful groups. We're not just sitting there meekly listening to what's said to us. And I'd say that the owners probably from Canada do see that in Ireland, but also the franchises in Ireland, the 18 now, I think we have 18 Pippin franchises, are more successful probably per head than the UK ones. They are very, very successful, the Irish
That's amazing.
ones. And they
18.
generate, now they're kind of under the radar because the previous master franchisor lived in England himself, and his strengths were in administration, organization, close support, organizing sales, training, keeping that up to date, but he was not interested in PR. He wouldn't do a podcast in a million years, and he would not be on radio or television talking about the business. So I think we suffered a bit by the fact that we didn't have PR going on. And I think PR is the key thing for small businesses where you can't bang $1 million into advertising. PR is probably the best way to go about getting out, talking about your business and getting the thing out. So that's, there's two types. I think there's two types of people who become entrepreneurs. There's people who have it in their genes, who just feel like all the time thinking of would this idea work? Would that work? And I mean, some of them try a business. I've been in several businesses. Some of them have been successful, moderately successful, and some of them haven't. And you bear the scars of those. But so that person may not be satisfied with the franchise, but somebody who say has left a bank or left teaching or left a well-paid state job after 20 years, but is still only maybe 40, 50 and wants to do something else, the franchise might represent a safer investment for them. They could make a good living, but they wouldn't be under the same pressures if they tried to set up a business where they could lose focus or where they didn't know where they're going in the first place. And there's a lot of people have business ideas, but they're not all good business ideas. They you see people setting up, you see on LinkedIn now, you see a lot of people with different business, but they're kind of not fluffy, but they're not hard-edged money-making operations. Whereas the essence of the franchise is, yes, we want to help people. Yes, it's a kind of a service industry, but also people can aspire to owning a good business and being able to sell it on later if they want to exit. So if you have a strong franchise in a certain territory and you decide you want to retire, take early retirement, or after your time, your 10 or 15 years, or whatever it might be running it, but you have something that you can sell. And it's not just like you're selling your own name, you're selling an established brand name that people would recognize if they were looking to buy a new
Exactly.
business. Whereas they mightn't buy Royal Lalor Limited, but they might buy Pittman Training Swords, or they might buy School is Easy Kerry.
That's what a lot of the franchise owners that I talk to in the business that I'm involved in do. They get to the you couldn't have said it better in terms of like a lot of them come from that corporate career where they spend 20, 30, 40 years in a corporate career, and they want to get they essentially want to buy themselves a job and be able to make a decent living out of it, have an impact, and without the risk of going and starting a brand new business, with all the added benefits of the support. Like within the network that I'm involved in, if you're in the UK or Ireland, you can attend 6 internal conferences a year. So every 2 months, you have the chance to spend a full day, a day and a half with other franchise owners and guest speakers, learning from them. You've got the home office supporting you every single day of the week. There's multiple people you can get in contact with. And I'm sure that's the same for yourself as well. So there was a couple of interesting stats that Dave McWilliams, the economist, he has his own podcast, mentioned only yesterday. And I said, I better write them down so I can mention them on this podcast. Because they stood out to me. I think the study was by KPMG, but I'll leave the link to the podcast below if anyone wants to listen to it. And it said that 42% of Irish workers intend to leave the job in the next year, compared to 21% pre-pandemic. That stat was wild to me, and 94% of people employed in their job are not happy. So there is alternatives out there, without all the risk, but a lot of the benefit of the training, the HR, the marketing that you've just mentioned. So if anyone wants to, and we're not near the end of the podcast, by the way, Roy, but I just want to give a shout out. If anybody wants to learn more about potentially what is involved in buying a franchise or becoming an area manager, where's the best ways to get in contact with you?
Well, my email is ireland@schooliseasy.com. They could contact me there. They could have a look at our website, schooliseasy.com, and they'll find me there as well. And I'm also on LinkedIn, and my mobile number is below the folder on LinkedIn as well. So if somebody wanted to contact me, they could get me through that.
I'll leave all those details in the description field wherever people are listening to this, whether it's on Spotify or Apple or any of the other common podcast apps. Roy, a question I like to ask a lot of my guests is around success. And here's the question. Do you have a personal definition of what success means to you?
I think, it's a very good one. I don't know whether I'm successful or not, because I figure a fellow of 63 who buys a new business and decides to start, having had a career in teaching and having a career in franchise business. I suppose at 63, if you start a new business and buy a master franchise and start trying to sell franchises, you're vaguely dissatisfied, possibly, with how you feel your career was. So, or
you don't like the idea of retirement and you just want to keep your brain active.
And it could be that. So I think lockdown was an interesting thing, because we had to shut our business in Source, but because we've got a computer-based learning platform, we were able to keep looking after the students. And we had one of our staff was living in Phibsborough, and the other guy lives in Source, and he helps me a lot with the social market. We do a lot of social marketing, digital marketing stuff. So he's helping me with that. And Maria, my wife and business partner, we were at home in Skerries, running the Pittman Centre, if you like, from home. And we kind of like that. Whereas normally we're going down to the office every day and we have to have 4 meetings a day to have, to feed through 100 inquiries to get a 25% conversion, the conversion rates, the metrics for doing sales. So that's quite hard work, and you're out every day. So we were thinking, if we were able to concentrate on School is Easy, we'd be able to work from home ourselves. We could also be working from anywhere. That's perfectly feasible as well. And I think that kind of appealed. And I think the idea of not stopping, I felt, I'm 63, I have a Jack Russell. I walk around Skerries, I do about 10K a day. Now, if I was retired, I'd need, my father's still alive at 96, so I figure I'd need about 6 Jack Russells to keep me going, walking around Skerries till 96. I'm not quite ready for that either, But I recognize the balance in life. I mean, I've always been keen on sport and activity, and as I say, I walk a lot. I'm in a walking club. I swim every day in the sea. I've done that for years. I'm not a new adopter, and I don't have a dry rub. I just.
Do you still swim at the end of October?
Oh, I'm swimming. I was swimming in yesterday. It's quite rough.
Wow.
And I'm going in today, and I spend about 10 to 15 minutes, so I can still swim about 500 meters there. But we swim all day around. Myself and a couple of friends. I swim with a pal, a friend of a friend, and the man is 86, and he had a hip done in February, and he was back in the water in May, and he swims, he gardens, he walks at 86, but he says that his older brother is much fitter than him at 90, so strong genes there. So that's a good model or example, because it would be nice to be 86 and still standing up straight. So I'm conscious of the balance in life. But as regards the success thing, I'm not sure. When you're young, when I was young, your parents really wanted you to have a job, a career, get into a job, get the safe, secure job, and so that mitigated against entrepreneurial stuff. So my kind of entrepreneurial things kept breaking out, but I don't think I ever had a good enough idea to render down, and also the supports weren't around 40 years ago. It was more difficult to go into business. You were definitely on your own, whereas now the enterprise boards are really good and very helpful. I mean, we built our first website for the safety training business in the year 2000, so we've been website savvy since 2000, but we built it with a grant from the enterprise board. And the only quibble I have with the enterprise board is that they're not very friendly towards franchising. They regard franchising as a sort of a displacement activity. They think that if they back a franchise, say in a town, and Costa Coffee or something comes to Skerries, that will displace a local trader, if you like, or a Irish state trader, which is understandable, but not completely reasonable, because franchising gives people the amount of failed businesses that are strewn across the landscape, from startups, is amazing. And actually, if they encouraged franchises, they would actually be getting more people into employment between the person taking the franchise and then the employees they would take on as well. Like if my goals are met and I have 20 franchises in throughout Ireland within the next 4 to 5 years, I would have there probably about 500 people tutoring for us. So
wow, that's a lot of employment.
It's a lot, and a lot of students for the last 2 years haven't had work because there was no opportunities for them. So it's a good opportunity for somebody who's, say, just coming out of teacher training college and hasn't got started on the job ladder yet, but wants to get a bit of experience. They can work with us. So, or somebody, say, who's taking a career break because they've got 3 or 4 kids, but might like to keep their hand in with teaching, they could work with us as well. Even somebody retired. I have a friend who's a retired principal, and he does some work in a very well-known Grimes College, let's say, in Dublin. I won't name it because I probably won't name my competitors, but the Institute of Education. We've all been there, I suppose. It's there for the last 40 years or more. So yeah, that's probably it. But success, I'm still not sure. I think my children, though, if I was to take an example, I think my children are more successful. They did what I asked them to do. They went to school, they took it seriously, they played sport, they took it seriously, they were enthusiastic about things they were doing. They were quite easy to manage, I think. but they're far more successful than me. My older son, as I say, went to school, did his leaving cert, played rugby, even had a girlfriend in leaving cert we didn't know about. We only found out by accident, and still got his 600 points or whatever, and got into Trinity first time to do medicine. So he was on the way the whole time. The second guy showed a lot of determination because he wasn't as smart, but he was very keen in rugby. And at one stage, I thought he was going to be he thought he was going to be a professional rugby player, but he bust one shoulder and then bust the other and then bust a leg, and that was the end of rugby. So he turned around and started studying, and because I remember checking his homework notebook in fifth year every day because I wasn't getting the outcomes I want. Now I'm not too officious of that, and I don't check people. I mean, if people work for me, I just say, do it this way, and we get on fine. But sometimes you have to take strong action, and the guy wasn't doing anything. And then because of the rugby, but then the injury, and then me on his case, by sixth year, I didn't have to do anything. Then he didn't do as well in the leaving cert as he hoped, but he got into DCU, didn't get into Trinity or where his brother was, or didn't get into UC. Very disappointed, but got into DCU, regrouped after a month, and came out with the first. And then with the first, he went to Oxford and did a master's in law. So
wow.
I think they're far more successful than I am. So if you measure it just by
well, you're successful in having raised them to be successful.
That comes back to the thing about the teaching, that you look at people that you have an influence on, and you say you're delighted, and if they are more successful, because teachers will have that. Teaching, you reach a certain level, a comfortable level in Ireland, you can live comfortably. You've only got 10 years. You've only got 10 years when you're broke, when they're eating all your food. But then, yes, you look back and say, yes, that was a success. And do you feel envy? No, you don't. You just feel pleased that the job worked out well. But I mean, parenting, you won't have that issue yet, I'm sure, but you're a very young man. But
not yet.
It's an ongoing process, and it never ends. And sometimes you say, Jesus, did I really sign up for this?
Yeah. I have a little while to go. Final question for you, Roy, is, and I've never asked this to a teacher, so I'm curious to know, would you have an answer to this? If you were the decision maker in adding a new mandatory subject to the secondary school curriculum, what would it be and why?
Well, I'm not sure I can answer that, but I can just give you an example that might help. So
please.
My older boy did the 7 subjects for the leaving cert and performed really well in all of those because he was a guy who was good across the whole range. My younger boy wasn't good at maths at all. We spent a lot of time and energy trying to get that right, but he'd been lost for 4 years in his first year, and from first year to fourth year, and he did go to quite a good school, but I wouldn't be fair to say about this. But so the 7 subjects of the leaving cert suited the older boy, but didn't suit the younger boy. And the younger boy might have been better doing A levels, where he would have done, say, English and history and maybe politics or sociology, because those are the areas he ended up in, and those are the areas he excelled in. So he wasn't ever going to be a 600-point man in that rough metric that's the leaving cert, but he could have done very well had he been doing A level somewhere else. So sometimes it could be better to do less subjects once the child and the parents and the support staff, the teaching staff, know what the person's strength is. Now, it's a difficult one to pick, because sometimes people think, I'm really interested in science, but maybe they don't have the background to do chemistry, physics, and biology for their leaving cert. But I do think that maybe some people, it would suit them better if they didn't have the 7 subjects, if they just had actually 3 or 4 subjects. Like the A levels. I'm not saying, and I don't know what the answer is, and I don't know which is the better model. I just think in the case of my 2, and sometimes you can bring it down to specifics, I think in the case of my 2, that perhaps the 3 subjects might have done for my younger boy, and he might have excelled sooner, because I wasn't sure what was going on. I wasn't sure was there a brain even when he was in 5th year, because he was so focused on the rugby and building himself up and getting bigger. He was 18 stone when he was
wow.
Yeah, he was very big, but he was concentrating in nutrition and very interested in that side of things, but not so interested in the academics for quite a while anyway, Yeah.
Roy, it's been a pleasure chatting with you for the last 45-50 minutes. I'll leave links to how to get in contact with you, the LinkedIn page, the company website of both businesses in the description field of this. If there's anything else you'd like me to leave a link to, just send me a message after the podcast and I'll put it in. But for today, I wish you continued success with your current businesses and in your personal life as well. But thanks for being my guest.
Thanks so much, Rian. Pleasure to be on.